Alright, what we have here is a research project I found on buildingscience.com, and it's basically talking about high wall R-value case studies. So, one of the first things that I do is, I go through and I think about, what is this report going to actually tell me? Before I sit down and read 70 pages of something, is it actually going to benefit me? So, instead of sitting down and starting at the very beginning, I'm going to scan through it and kind of see what it includes. So the second page is basically the same thing as the first, has some decent information on it, just a cover page there. So I'm going to skip right past that. And now I'm actually starting to get into the good stuff. So what I'm really doing here is trying to teach you some reading strategies. So a big part of being a good designer is learning about new techniques, new construction methods, different building products, and you can't just necessarily rely on what other people are saying. You have to do some investigation. You have to do some research yourself. So part of that might be going through and reading research papers like this. So my table of contents, I can kind of just jump down to part B here. We have an analysis, wall assemblies reviewed, analysis criteria, heat flow analysis. So a lot of these things you might not know anything about. Whenever we're looking at C, it starts talking about results. The subsets of C, we are basically looking at our case studies. So this is telling me real quickly, what are we talking about? We have Case 2, we have advanced framing with insulated sheathing. Case 3, interior 2x3 horizontal strapping. Case 4, double stud. So just looking at this table of contents, what this is really telling me right now is it's going to give you a nice little introduction into what it's going to be talking about within these different case studies. So my approach, if I was going to do this research, I would probably spend a little bit of time with this section B, and I would look at it and I would kind of scan through it and try to find what information is it going to be talking about. Is it going to be good information? Because if I jump right into this section right here, I might not know what they're talking about. So I need to have a little bit of an introduction with this section right here before I start jumping into the actual results. And you can see part D, the conclusions, that's going to, I would say that's more than likely going to wrap everything up. So if I just skip forward a little bit here, now I'm at my introduction page. So just to show you a little bit of a technique that I like to use if I'm going through and doing this, I basically have 3 different ways of categorizing the things that I'm reading. The yellow highlighted areas, this is good information, but probably won't be in my presentation. The red line, anything that's circled with the red line, that's something that I need to gain a better understanding of. I might need to do additional research on it, maybe look something up on the internet, grab a book, read that, magazine articles, ask me, the instructor, about, and that would be good stuff that we could have group discussion about. And the blue stuff is things that I think at this point I want to include in my presentation. So by doing this, I have a 70-page research paper that I don't have to sit down and memorize everything that it's saying. I basically go through, create a quick outline for myself, give myself a resource that I can go back to at any time, look at it real quickly and say, okay, I might want to scan through the yellow items just so that I know what's going on. The red items are things that I need to spend a little bit more time on and get a better understanding of. And the blue stuff is the things that I want to actually put into some kind of a presentation. So I'm not going to read all of this for you, but I'll read this first chapter, and we'll just go through and see why that might be some good information, but probably not going to be in the presentation. So, many concerns, including the rising cost of energy. Climate change concerns and demands for increased comfort have led to the desire for increased insulation levels in many new and existing buildings. More building codes are being modified to require higher levels of thermal control than ever before. This report considered a number of promising wall systems that can meet the requirements for better thermal control. Unlike previous studies, this one considers performance in a more realistic manner, including some true three-dimensional heat flow and the relative risk of moisture damage. So, out of those things, I'm basically looking at this, and yeah, it's a nice introduction. It gives me a good feel for what we're going to be talking about, but I'm not going to include any of that in my presentation, and it's not going to be something that I'm going to try real hard to memorize or get a really good understanding of. It's just a basic kind of statement. And as we scan down through there, there's a lot of yellow. There's going to be a lot of yellow. The one thing that I did highlight, risk of moisture damage, because it kind of stuck out as, well, we're not really talking about moisture, we're talking about insulation and energy. How does the risk of moisture damage come into play? So I put a blue line under that. Whether or not I include that, we'll find out. So the next thing, in some cases, increasing the quantity of insulation may result in increased risk of moisture-related issues. When the exterior surfaces of the enclosure are kept colder in cold weather and the interior surfaces are kept cooler in warm weather, this may result in increased condensation. So that was just kind of an elaboration on what I just read, so I highlighted that as well in blue. So you can see I'll go through and I'll highlight some main topics and stuff, and this is basically stuff that I'm going to scan through. I'm not going to read this over 4 times until I completely understand it. I'm going to read a little bit of it, scan through it, get the gist of what I'm reading, and then I'm going to move on to the next thing. And it talks about your wall assemblies review. This is very similar to what I saw in the table of contents, so I don't necessarily need to go through that. And down at the bottom, analysis criteria. So it's basically talking about how it's going to come up with an analysis. So at this point, this is where I start to get a little bit better information. It gives me this nice, neat table. And in the last part, it tells me that a 1 is a poor performing wall, and a 5 is a rating for an excellent performing wall. So I can look at this and I can see these are the things. I can very quickly see how they're rating the wall systems. They're looking at thermal control, durability of wetting and drying. I might not necessarily know what that is at this point. The buildability, whether or not someone's actually going to be able to build it. The cost of the wall, if it costs too much, nobody's going to want to build it. And how the materials are used. So each one of these things will get a rating system, and they'll come up with a total. So it'll be kind of interesting. I'm guessing that they're going to use this exact same chart in their conclusion and give total values for each wall system based upon all the research they did. So I'm kind of getting a preview of how they're going to sum this up. So if I just skip forward a little bit, it talks about the analysis, how they're going to get to those conclusions. And whenever I'm looking at these, they're talking about R values, and at this point we all should know about R values. But they say that 5 R values have been and used in the building industry. So I didn't really know about that. I knew about the installed insulation R value, but the rest of these I didn't necessarily know a whole lot about. I circled the one that was very interesting to me in red that I really didn't know anything about. And I can come back to that and I can do more research on that. And it gives me some nice pictures that I could look at. Talks about different things within the building enclosure. Breaks down some R values on this page for me. And it also talks about the thermal conductivity of them. And I'm assuming that if you went through that, it would give you a nice explanation of what the thermal conductivity is. So what I'll do is whenever I come to a conclusion, what I like to do is I go through and just real quickly write down a couple notes explaining what I got from that little section. And that way I don't have to read this over 100 times before I remember. So real quickly, my notes, my summary. What we are currently doing isn't good enough. That's one thing I got out of this. The next thing is the methods used to test aren't accurate. And the last thing, the insulating methods have a lot of deficiencies. So the things that we're currently using aren't doing well. So if I just jump forward a little bit, we have some word I've never heard of, hygrothermal analysis, so I can read about that and get some better understanding. It talks about vapor barriers, and I'll do the same thing. You know, I'll go through and highlight the things I want to learn about. In red there, things that are important to read, but not necessarily going to go into my report. And whenever I'm all said and done, I'll have another page that has a summary. And my summary had a little bit more information in it here. As designers, we need to be concerned with water in the structure. And that's going to come in a few different forms: construction details, rain, materials, how the materials shed rain, how the insulation affects condensation, and the drying ability of the wall. So whenever I started designing my wall system, I might not have thought about how well the wall has the ability to dry. I might not have thought about how insulation affects how the wall will condensate or not. And the last one, vapor barriers and their effects on walls. So they talk a little bit about vapor barriers in there, what they are, how they're used, where they're supposed to be used. And the impression that I start to get from this brief reading is, the question is, are they a good thing? And that's basically the approach that I would take. I'm going to go through, I'm going to scan through the different things, the different pages. I'm going to try to find any good information. I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to do a little summary of it. I'm going to make some notes. And then I'll come back to all this whenever it comes time to actually pull it together into some sort of presentation.